So today we're doing a woman who was a writer, nearly a politician in 1930s France, and one of the two wives of Natalie Barney, so to speak. It's Lily de Gramont.
I don't know how to react. I know nothing about her.
It's fine. Most people probably don't. There isn't much about her written in English. There is, however, a 600-page French biography.
Which you read?
What other reason was there for me to continue studying French than for the dead women?
Oh, you and your dead French lesbian paramours. All right, so what do we know about Lily de Gramont?
Well, she was born April 23rd, 1875. However, her mother, Isabelle de Beauveau-Crayon, died a few days after she was born. So she initially lived with her grandmother. Her father was off in a French garrison. We also know that not only was she an aristocrat, but she was a descendant of King Henry III of France.
Ooh.
Yes, we're dealing with high nobility.
Fancy.
However, small fact, her name initially was spelled Elisabeth with a Z, which is unusual in France. She later on changed it so it had an S instead.
Why did they do the Z? Were they feeling like English, American? What were they going for?
English, her grandmother was Scottish.
Oh. Was this like frowned upon? Or
No,
were they chill about it?
it was just a little bit weird.
Unlike other women in her circle, she actually changed her name to make it more normal.
Yes.
No, I'm okay. I'm not judging anyone with a weird name. I'm just saying, I think it's funny.
Well, on the subject of name changes, Romaine only changed her name because she felt that Goddard was associated with insanity.
Right, so that was like a trauma thing.
Another fun fact actually is that her grandmother nicknamed her the Little Queen.
Oh, so she wasn't just of royal blood, but she was also of a certain temperament.
Perhaps. I mean, it's interesting to compare that initial nickname to her later nickname of the Red Duchess.
Oh wow. So she got feisty, is what we're saying.
I would say she was always feisty.
But I don't know. Little Queen to me says like maybe bossy, maybe a bit putting on airs or something. The Red Duchess says, "We'll murder you."
I don't think she'd go so far as to murder someone.
But maybe with a look.
I think many of these women could do that.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so she's living with her grandmother. She actually doesn't see her father until she's 3 years old.
So I'm sure that she had a weird reaction then to seeing him.
Well, I don't really know anything about her reaction. I do know that her father decided to take her to an apple tree and shake it, and then apples rain down on her head.
Was this a positive experience for her?
It was supposed to be. I don't think anyone really appreciates apples hitting them in the head.
Yeah, well, so it sounds like they had an interesting relationship. Did this continue? Did she continue to have kind of an ambivalent relationship with her father? Did he step up more later?
I mean, ambivalent is one word to describe it. She took him to court for embezzlement.
Okay.
And she won, but he skipped off with his third wife to Italy.
Okay, I'm getting a picture here of who this guy is.
Anyway, her father goes on to remarry. He marries a Rothschild, Marguerite.
Because he hadn't had enough of fanciness, I guess.
Well, this time he actually married someone for money, in a way. She had far more money than Isabel.
And how did that work out? I mean, clearly this was his second wife, so and there was a third wife, so
from Lily's viewpoint, it worked out rather well. She got on well with her stepmother. She actually never saw her really as her stepmother, but as her actual mother, since she had no memory whatsoever of her birth mother.
Well, that's good.
Fun fact, this actually makes her related to Helen van Zuylen van Nieuwlet.
And who would this be?
Who later dated Renee Vivian after Natalie and Renee broke up.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, so Lily ended up having 2 half-brothers and a half-sister as well, who she was close to.
Oh, that's nice. So she got more family than she'd had before. Looks like that was an opportune marriage in more ways than one.
Yes. Anyway, so life goes on. She, even as a child and a teenager, very interested in the intellectual side of things. And eventually, as is expected, she marries. She marries Philibert de Gramont when he is 28 and she is 21 after they meet at a party in 1896.
Was she into him?
I don't really think so. No, I mean, he's covered in hair and not the best of men.
Mm. Are these things she has said about him?
It's been noted.
Mm.
But no, she isn't exactly thrilled at the marriage, but she is content for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Emphasis on a while.
So what happens?
Well, for a while it's fine. They move in the same circles as Wynera's singer, going to parties, going to salons. And then her first daughter, Beatrix, is born in 1897. However, Philibert does abuse her. At one point, he actually causes her to miscarry their son.
Oh no.
And the doctor was a family friend who doesn't reveal the reason for her miscarriage, basically to avoid scandal.
Is this like in her interest or in Philibert's interest there?
I think it's more the save face of everyone involved. She does nearly die, though, during that incident.
Wow. Wow, so how did she get out?
It takes a while. She does, after that, try to get a separation. She doesn't want to stay. She goes to her parents. Her parents, specifically her father, wants her to stay and avoid the scandal of divorce.
God, that is awful. She almost died. Like, and even if she hadn't, that is so bad. And yeah, ugh. People shouldn't stay in marriages if they are being abused.
But she does stay for a while, anyway, like many people.
Yeah, I mean, because it is hard to get out, especially without community support.
Yeah, even today, that's actually why some people started a nonprofit such as Unchained at Last, and there's other regulations and help that we have today that she would not have back then.
Because it was more normal for people to stay together in abusive marriages because of like religious stuff or cultural stuff.
Yeah, cultural stuff, social pressure, keeping up a certain facade, sort of like keeping up with the Joneses. So this continues. Times he abuses her, times he doesn't. She does actually end up making some friends, at least, continuing intellectual pursuits. She actually ends up becoming a part of the Circle Victor Hugo.
Ooh.
Which is filled with lesbians and bisexuals.
Really? Was Victor Hugo one of us?
No. I'm pretty sure it has to do with a street address instead. She doesn't at this point have any lesbian love affairs, but she does meet the lesbian painter Louise Breslau, not to be confused with another painter named Louise, which would be Louise Abema, lover of Sarah Bernhardt.
Wow, so there's just all these gay Louises running around Paris.
Yes, so she befriends Louise and Louise's lover, Zildart, and I think it sort of plants the alternate possibilities to her abusive marriage in her mind.
Yeah, right. No, you can stay together with men who abuse you, or you can have fun and chill out with ladies who are cool. One or the other. It's a really hard choice. It actually probably was then, though, because of all the cultural stuff.
Yeah, even when he would do stuff like not give her money for clothes so she would be more shabbily dressed than other women of her status. And he would also get a mistress.
Wow, so he's just like humiliating her and also beating her within an inch of her life.
Yeah.
Asshole.
His mistress was actually called Madame D.
Oh, as in she likes the...
I have no idea, but it's a very unfortunate connotation for her in this day and age.
Yeah. God. One can only hope that she also didn't experience everything. Yeah, so what happened here? How did Lily get out?
Well, it's still a ways in the future.
God, no. Okay, so when she is meeting all these lesbians, how old is she? How long has she been married?
So, saying they got married like 1896, it is now like 1902, 1905.
Wow, so this has been like a large chunk of her young adulthood has been spent in this horrible marriage.
Yeah, she's still at like late 20s.
Okay, so what does she do next? Still trapped in this horrible marriage.
Well, she has another daughter, Diane, in 1902. So, still trapped in this marriage. Some bright spots are just her friends. Louise Breslow paints a portrait of her older daughter and then one of Lily herself, which contrasts rather interesting with another portrait of Lily in that the one Breslow does seems rather softer to me. Kind of reminds me of the whole difference between the male gaze and the female gaze. That stuff like Portrait of a Lady on Fire brings up. She also actually gets to visit Tunisia in 1904 with Lucy Delarue Madrus.
And who is this?
A poet who was in a mariage blanc with Dr. J.C. Madrus. And Lucy herself would later on have an affair with Natalie and also introduce Natalie and Lily to each other.
Ooh, that's fun.
So yeah, they visit Tunisia. Lily gets to travel. They search for another writer and Swiss explorer, Isabel Eberhardt, who drowned in the desert a month before they arrived.
Oh no, that's too bad.
Yeah, fun fact, you can drown in a desert.
Just sinking into the sand?
Flash floods.
Flash floods. Yeah, that makes sense. I've seen that on the whatever nature channel.
Also during this time, the Circle Victor Hugo nicknames her Joy.
Why? Doesn't sound like a particularly joyful time.
As for why Elizabeth was called Joy, she was, despite the abusive marriage, happy on occasions. Like, she decided she wasn't going to live, like, perpetually under her husband's thumb, kowtowing to him all the time. So, at Circle Victor Hugo, she would still be happy. This natural disposition coming through.
That's really sweet. Just kind of resisting all of the awfulness just by being herself.
She actually ends up with a lover.
Oh!
Albert Flemont, a journalist, who is also bisexual, and that is in 1908.
I love it. Love those bis getting together. That's good that she can compartmentalize somewhat.
Mm-hmm. And then she finally meets Natalie in April 1909 at Lucy's house.
Mm-hmm.
And it's Lily's first gay affair.
Uh-huh.
She actually spends several days at Natalie's place from the night of April 30th till May 3rd.
Wow. What does her husband think about all this?
Her husband doesn't know at first. He's actually out of town at this point, and her children are off safely somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Her affair with the journalist Albert doesn't last very long after this.
Mm-hmm. I mean, on the one hand, that's too bad because I love that bi solidarity, but also...
But yeah, Philibert will eventually find out, and Lily will eventually finally separate and divorce him.
Mm-hmm. Thank God.
Yeah, actually, after she initially leaves him, she and her daughters don't really have a place to stay, so they spend some time living with Natalie, actually, which is recorded in Natalie's short story, The Woman Who Lives With Me.
Oh, yeah, that would be it. Keep it on the nose.
You would think that story was initially misattributed to Renee Vivian, where they thought it was about Renee Vivian.
But I mean, she also did live with her a bit, right?
No, and Renee never had children or married.
Oh, weird. So then they were just like, oh, yeah, Renee was with Natalie, so clearly.
Yeah, but no. You can very easily tell from Natalie's writing, and in fact, I'll read a little bit here for you. It begins with the sentence, "She came to me because her life was broken and nothing mattered much."
What a beginning.
I mean, one could say that if one is in an abusive marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And it ends about 2 pages later, because this is a short story. It ends, "Last night she said to me, I never could stand going back to him now. I had hoped I had guessed what she meant, but I ask why. Because and she held my hands very tightly and kissed them, and then she wept.
Oh, it's so gay. Ah, yeah, that's the dream, isn't it? Just you're in a horrible situation like that, and then you find someone who gives you hope, gives you a way out, gives you another more exciting life.
I would say life with Natalie Barney is always exciting.
Yeah. Oh, you believe that.
So then also the lesbian Wagnerian opera occurs when Romaine and Natalie get together, and Lily doesn't like it because suddenly there's someone who could actually be probably supplant her in Natalie's affections, because Natalie had never had as serious a love affair during their time together as the one she had with Lily. But that all resolves. It's a weird three-way marriage. And Lily finally gets divorced in 1920.
Oh, goodness. How? How does she finally? Is it just that she like feels like she's able to now because she's old enough that she's separate from her family and like has this lesbian life? Like what allows her to finally make that change?
So it is that she finally feels like she can, I would say, but I think a large part of it is she actually has support. She has Natalie's support. She has a place she can live for a while during this, and she can actually just go through the whole court trial.
Yeah, I imagine that's a very like emotionally draining endeavor. In addition to like costing a lot and all that.
Yeah, she really doesn't have that much money. Now she actually she ends up downsizing to a smaller house, still a mansion, but smaller, and renting.
Smaller mansion.
Yes. Sounds like a weird problem to have, but she takes this other bigger one and rents it to a foreign ambassador and makes sure that her now ex-husband never sees a penny of that money.
That's good that she can do that.
Yes. Now, the reason as to why she is the Red Duchess, we do have to touch on some of that. She is a duchess, but the daughter of a duke, and when it comes to Philibert, the wife of one. The red part is because she gets introduced to the ideas of Marxism by Charles Rappaport.
Ooh, so red not as in bloody, but red as in comrade.
Socialist. Yes. Lily, as we've mentioned in previous episodes, is more politically, socially aware than Natalie and Romaine. Lily also actually does more in World War I than either of them. So after World War I starts, Lily actually becomes a nurse at a hospital in Honfleur. Meanwhile, Natalie is just a pacifist and holding pacifist meetings in her salon to oppose the war's existence.
I mean, we all have to do our part.
Yeah. The war was also a good relief from her husband because he was a captain, so she didn't have to deal with him nearly as much.
Nice.
But back to the Marxism, socialism, communism. In 1915, she starts to write for The Radical, a journal that had recently started to lean towards socialism. Now, it doesn't last long, but this is the start of her political career, so to speak.
So what does this entail?
You mean her writing?
No, her political career, so to speak, that you said it was the start of.
Oh, that doesn't come about until later in the 1930s with the Popular Front. Before we get there, there's her honeymoon in the US with Natalie after World War I. I still have no idea how neither of these women caught the Spanish flu. Like, that is still going around, and they're traveling by ship. You're stuck in a tin can for days, for weeks on end.
Yeah, and they weren't probably social distancing or wearing masks or anything.
But anyway, they get back to France in 1920, just in time for Lily to really get her divorce and to no longer be a bigamist, since Natalie Barney had proposed marriage to her and she had accepted. But of course, what government is going to acknowledge a lesbian marriage?
Right. especially a three-way one.
And she has other love affairs throughout the 20s.
Oh.
Not nearly as many as Natalie.
Well, I mean, no one could be as prolific as Natalie.
I wouldn't say that quite yet.
Ooh. No spoilers.
No spoilers, but tune in for further episodes of the podcast if you want to hear about all that.
Anyway.
So one of them is the French writer Germaine Lefranc. Very honest, spontaneous, fairly well-known, also very intelligent, full of humor and life, which Lily very much liked because she loved to joke and laugh. That's part of the reason she was nicknamed Joy.
Well, sweet. So at least one of these people is, like, having fun.
I would say they all had fun at different points in their lives.
Just some of them were more, like, intense and brooding, and it seems like she was more lighthearted.
Perhaps. Anyway, Lefranc had her own humor and a caustic wit or spirit in her writing. She actually wrote a 4-act comedy. The English translation of the title is So Be It. That was actually performed in Marseille in May of 1922 to great success.
How did she get to that point of having her stuff being performed? Do we know that?
No, not off the top of my head, but I'm assuming since she's in this whole milieu that it's knowing someone who knows someone.
That makes sense. I can see that. So what was Lily like? Because I don't think that we've really, aside from her achieving the nickname Joy, I don't think that we've really heard about what she was like in social situations.
I would say in between Romaine and Natalie more of a social butterfly, Romaine more of an introvert.
Mm-hmm.
We also know that Lily was very much an Epicurean, very much all about the senses and indulging them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Though the love affair that causes more consternation is the one she has with Leanne de Bougie.
Mm-hmm.
That's a sort of three-way between her, Leanne, and Natalie at one point.
Well, so why does this cause consternation?
Well, first, it sort of starts out with all three of them involved. So, for instance, Lily and Natalie would visit Leanne and they'd talk and they'd end up in the bed together.
Mm-hmm. That sometimes happens when you're with one of France's premier courtesans.
Well, she's a princess by now.
Oh, God, these people are so fancy.
In fact, her new husband would sit in the corner and he and Lily would be talking.
Gotta imagine that'd be distracting.
Apparently not.
Can't relate. But anyway, so then things evolved, it seems like.
Yes. As the weirdness with George was actually because he was a voyeur. So yeah, he and Lily would discuss literature while Natalie and Leanne were in bed caressing each other and talking. And then George would read poetry while the three of them were together.
Interesting choice.
I mean, as Leanne described it, it had been charming, though perhaps a little nerve-wracking.
Well, yeah, because imagine also you'd want to make sure it's good. I wouldn't want to be performing for my partner, but that's just me.
Well, you've never been a courtesan.
Yeah,
and also
nor would I want to be.
Also, to each her own.
Yeah, sounds like it was working for them.
Yes, so it continues after that to when Leanne, who hadn't been in Paris for a while because of reactions to her second marriage and becoming a princess and whatnot, she shows up at Natalie's salon, and Lily is there, goes through the crowd with her hand outstretched, and declares, "It's for your sake that I'm here."
Wow. These women were fancy, and they were dramatic.
I don't think anyone could beat the dramatics of Natalie Barney, but yes.
Love it.
Anyway, Leanne develops a crush on Lily, sort of obsesses over her a bit. She goes on about her unclothed body, her style, her flute playing, her clothes, her walk, her nature, on and on. And then at some point, she actually ends up at Lily's house. She calls on her and visits her and gets jealous when she spots a second pair of slippers under a chest in Lily's bedroom and thinks they belong to Natalie.
No, not a pair of slippers.
And not to her wife.
Yeah, heaven forbid her wife be with her.
But yeah, anyway, it becomes very, very obvious to Natalie, and she gets a bit sulky.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a great deal back and forth of broken engagements to go visit each other and so on and so forth. And then Leanne writes to Lily and just invites her to come visit her.
Oh.
Natalie learns of this and is absolutely furious and writes Leanne to say so. Upon which the princess noted, Natalie is becoming cantankerous. It must be the change of life.
Wow. Wow. They write the worst things about each other.
In sometimes, yes, they could snip at each other. They could argue, they'd have fights. The princess made herself scarce for a while, and it took a while for everything to just settle.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as to the possible affair between Lily and Romaine that occurred on Capri in the 1920s, one biographer thinks it didn't happen, another one thinks it did. I can't find conclusive evidence, so we're just going to put a question mark there.
If we ever meet their ghosts, we will ask them.
Yes. Romaine will probably glare at us. I don't know what Lily would do, and Natalie would probably make some snide comment.
That is one of those great mysteries.
Yes. Now, the last affair to mention from the 1920s is with a Blanche Gay who was born in Algiers. And who Lily meets in 1929 at Beauvalon, where Natalie and Romaine have their hyphenated villa house.
Oh, how does Natalie feel about Lily having all these affairs? I mean, Natalie has a lot of affairs, but as we saw with Leanne de Pougy, there was some jealousy happening.
That occurs throughout. Like sometimes Natalie is jealous of Romaine's affairs, like with Renata Borgatti. Sometimes she's jealous of Lily's affairs, like with Leanne.
But in the end, like it all evens out. They're all fine with everything. They're able to stay together.
Yes. But anyway, Blanche pops up here and there because she sort of serves the role for Lily that Lahovery would serve for Natalie later on in life as a sort of companion and nurse. Blanche is there when Lily dies. But before that, we have other people dying.
Oh no.
Because unfortunately, her daughter Beatrix has had tuberculosis.
Oh, that's so rough after everything else.
Yes, and she dies of TB in 1930 in a Swiss sanatorium.
Now, has Lily been active in her children's lives? I know that she's been very active in the lesbian scene recently, and she's been having all these fun polyamorous affairs. But throughout this, has she also been like connected with her kids?
Not as much. There are times actually that Lily will say to her friends that she doesn't think she's that good of a mother.
Oh.
One of her daughters actually doesn't get along with her because of how Lily lives her life. But she's still crushed when Beatrix dies, and because Natalie has never had kids, doesn't understand anything at all, she actually goes to Romaine, who we've noted in Romaine's episode that she most likely did have a child who did die very young. So they mourn together. And now we have moved into the 1930s. And this is really where the whole politics comes up for Lily, with her almost political career.
How does this get started? I mean, you've talked about her writing being part of this.
Some of her writing, because she does write other things. She writes novels, she writes memoirs throughout her life, in addition to what she wrote for The Radical. So first, she actually visits the Soviet Union. This is her first of two visits, actually. And one of the things she notices is that everyone should be straight. Gays are denounced as a malaise of the bourgeoisie.
Yeah, obviously that's very silly. Because, like, I mean, there are rich gays, but there's also a lot of poor gays. Like, It's not one of those things that happens because of your wealth status.
It does get worse. Like on her second visit, she is confronted with the fact that Soviet Jews are being sent to the Gulag.
Mm-hmm.
This is in 1935 that her second trip occurs, because she had made friends, acquaintances on her first trip, intellectuals and writers who happen to be Jewish, who she actually goes to try to visit.
See, Jewish intellectual sounds so bourgeois. Better send that person to a gulag.
Yeah, there are things Lily does not like, and I would say that her Marxism is dampened down a bit because of this, though she still leans very heavily left.
So it's more that she's seen how, in some situations, this kind of rhetoric of socialism can be turned against the people that it's supposed to serve.
Yes, but she does still get involved with politics. She gets involved with the Popular Front in France.
And who are they? What do they do?
Very left-leaning political movement.
What are their goals?
So the Popular Front was a bunch of left-wing movements that included communist, socialist, and progressive people.
So it's like a pretty broad coalition there.
Yes. It was founded in 1936 and dissolved in 1938. So a very short-lived movement.
Oh, yeah. I wonder what happened in 1938.
Well, part of its dissolution was because of issues related to the Spanish Civil War, which occurred from 1936 to 1939, as well as effects from the Great Depression.
So political upheaval.
So Lily gets involved with them, and it gets to the point, actually, where they're going to make a new government with women involved. Now, you do have to keep in mind that France was behind on the whole women's suffrage. So whereas British and American women got the right to vote after World War I, French women had not. So one of the leaders in the Popular Front, Leon Blum, comes to...
Leon Blum, is he Jewish? Sorry. His name is Leon Blum. He's Jewish.
Well, I couldn't tell. If you really wanted to know, he was heavily influenced by the Dreyfus Affair.
I bet a Jewish person in France was heavily influenced by the Dreyfus Affair.
Oh, yes. For those who don't know, the Dreyfus Affair was of a French Jewish officer accused of espionage with Germany. Falsely accused, actually. It was another French officer, one who wasn't Jewish, who actually committed it.
But, you know, those untrustworthy Jews. Anyway,
two names are put forward, two women, Louise Weiss and Elisabeth de Gramont. Now, Lily does not end up taking this because there are concerns about her lesbianism.
Oh, God, that happens in every political movement, doesn't it? It's like, oh, well, because, you know Bayard Rustin in the U.S., who helped orchestrate the March on Washington with Martin Luther King Jr., but because Bayard Rustin was gay, he wasn't allowed to be a major figure in the movement. It happens everywhere, I guess, that LGBT people, being not the most appropriate optics for a movement, just aren't allowed to take center stage, even when they are qualified and good for the position.
Yeah, well, she wasn't that upset about it.
Well, that's fine then. What was the thing that they were thinking about giving her? What was the political power that they were potentially going to give her?
It was in a cabinet.
A cabinet position.
Yeah, as opposed to a closet.
Yeah, so they wanted her both closeted and cabineted. She was only going to have one of those, so they threw her out. So she didn't get this because they wanted to keep everything very straight. So what did she do?
March through the streets with her fist in the air.
Love it. Love a good French revolutionary. Okay.
No French Revolution, all right, no. Her neck would not be cut. Her head would stay with her torso.
Revolutionary doesn't have to be capitalized. So she marched for causes. When did women get suffrage in France?
1944.
Damn. When did she die?
1954.
Okay, so she had 10 solid years of voting. Oh, at least she lived to see it.
Yeah. She lived to see a lot of things.
Like?
The atomic bomb,
Mm.
automobiles.
Had she been involved in any of the like nuclear activism? Because I know that that was leading up to its development, and then directly afterwards, there were some people who were very anti-bomb.
Not that I know of.
Mm-hmm.
I only know of her involvement with Marxism and that part of politics.
Mm-hmm. And suffrage. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so there weren't any other like major causes that she glommed onto as times changed.
Not that I know of. A lot of what she did aside from the politics with Marxism was her writing.
Mm-hmm. What about we have talked about Romaine and Natalie and the Jewish question. Um so so how did Lily deal with Jews and the Holocaust and the way that France was responding to all of that?
Well, Lily did not actively participate in the resistance. From what I gathered, she didn't know of people who were active in it, but she is an old woman at this point.
How old was she?
At the end of World War II, she was 70.
Yeah. So I mean there were probably 70-year-old resistance people, but that was probably not the norm.
I would imagine not.
Mm-hmm.
Can't see Lily racing through the streets of Paris after sabotaging something.
Yeah. So she did other things. So then what was she up to during that time?
Not a lot. So, back to the Jewish question, as you so phrased it. Several of her friends were Jewish. Her stepmother, who she saw as a mother, was Jewish. Natalie would have been considered Jewish at the time. She never said anything anti Semitic that I know of, if that's what you're asking.
Unlike some people.
Yes, even the one who's considered Jewish makes anti Semitic comments.
Mm-hmm. Do we know anything about like her writings? Like, did she have any statements on Jewish things?
Not that I know of. I haven't come across a lot of her writings. Most of it has been her memoirs.
Which I guess probably wouldn't really touch on that as much. She's not actively promoting anti-Semitism, but she's not actively dismantling it either.
You can only do so much as one woman.
Right? Yeah. No. And I guess in her ideal vision of Marxism, maybe we would live in a post anti-Semitism world. Um, so that was maybe built into her other activism.
But anyway, with World War II, as we know, Natalie and Romaine are in a villa in Florence dealing with bombs and Nazi soldiers living there for a time and whatnot. Lily spends part of the war in Honfleur, and then she is in Paris at the time that it's liberated. She goes through deprivations with food and whatnot. She hears about what's going on with other people, Gertrude Stein hiding, Colette having to get her third or fourth and Jewish husband out of a holding camp in France. Dolly Wilde dying in London.
Yeah, so as with many of these women's stories, it all kind of falls apart in World War II.
It does. It really does. It falls apart in World War II and to an extent after World War II because everyone's just dying off and old with their problems. Before she does die, she actually has another tragedy.
Oh no.
Her other daughter, Diane, dies of cancer in 1949.
No! What? Hasn't she had enough problems?
No, she outlives both of her children.
Poor woman.
Yeah, she does dedicate one of her books to her after. Yeah, then Lily dies in 1954, and Natalie does not go to her funeral. The love of her life gets a bunch of flowers, hands them to a servant, and lingers in the doorway and watches him put the flowers on the bed with her, because she died in her bed at night.
Mm. That's just really sad.
She didn't hide away like Romaine, though.
So she was loved and she knew she was loved until the end.
Yeah, she had actually only recently had lunch with Natalie, and she was supposed to meet either a friend or her sister later that week for lunch.
Wow. What happened? Do we know if was there like a health thing of some sort that caused it?
So Lily's health had been declining since Diane's death. She never recovered, as Alice Talkless said. However, it did come really, really suddenly.
I mean, I guess all of these women have to die at some point. Like they can't all still be alive right now, but
That would be very odd. You'd have, what, 150-year-olds running around?
yeah, no. But it is sad when we get to the end of these and it's like, well, yeah, at some point she had to go. So I guess then the question is always, what is her legacy? What lives on after her? If not her two daughters, then
There's a fair amount of nonfiction. So her memoirs or memories, there's 3 or 4 books in this series. Then she discusses the society she was in, the era of France, the people she knew, stuff that was going on. She also wrote a book about her friend Marcel Proust, the famous writer.
her friend Marcel Proust.
Yes,
How did that happen?
salons.
People all know each other.
Yeah, you go to a salon, you meet new friends, you end up with a lover. Enter the residual effects of her activeness in politics. She also does appear in other people's books. She is Duchess Clitorisa in Juno Barnes' Lady's Almanac.
Okay. Quite a name.
There's several interesting names in Lady's Almanac, but that is another episode. There's also the portrait Romaine did of her.
I'm gonna have to look that up later.
It's a very nice portrait. I think it bears more similarities to the one she did of Natalie than the other portraits that Romaine did.
Yeah, you talked about that there was also a portrait by a man of her.
There's several portraits of Lily. There's Romaine's, there's Louise Breslau's, and yes, there is a man called Laszlo. Portrait.
So there's many different ways of looking at the way that other people looked at her at the time.
Yes, there's also a few photographs. And remember, just because it's the 1900s doesn't mean that you can't have a wife and a husband, because no one's going to recognize that kind of bigamy.